Hello, my name is Commander Dennis Spence, and I'm the Chair of Research Education and Facilitation at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, California. In this podcast, I'm going to go over how to make a poster for a research presentation. The objectives for this podcast include describing a stepwise approach for making a poster for a scientific meeting. I will review some helpful tips for presenting a poster and present some resources to help when making a poster. So what is a research poster? Well, many times you're creating a poster to hang in a conference hall, say at your professional meeting. There's more to than just hanging up a poster and standing by it. What else is involved with developing a poster is developing your narrative, or thinking about what you're going to say when that group or single person comes by your poster. Also, part of developing a poster is creating handouts. When you make a poster, you only have so much space, and you want to get your most important message out to your audience. However, many times you can provide additional information, such as the abstract or detailed analysis results in a handout. Research posters are a hybrid between a speech and a manuscript. And sometimes with a poster presentation, you have a little bit more, it's more of an informal setting. You have more opportunity to have a conversation with somebody as they're coming by and really talk about what you found and get some feedback from them in terms of your results. Also, it's an excellent teaching and learning opportunity both for you and for your viewers. It's a nice way to dialogue with experts in the field, and they can give you good feedback in terms of your findings, and you also might find a way that you'll make contacts with other investigators, and this may help you with further research down the road. So what are the sections of a poster? They include the introduction, the methods, the results, and either a discussion or a conclusion header, depending on your format or your preference. Also, it'll include an acknowledgement section where you acknowledge others who helped you make the poster, as well as your sponsoring agency. You need to prepare your poster. You need to consider the audience that's going to be viewing it. Just like when you're preparing a manuscript for publication, you need to think about that journal that you're submitting to and who the readers are. You need to think about who's going to be seeing your poster. You got to remember that many people who are viewing a poster, say at a national meeting, many of those people are everyday clinicians who may not have expertise in research methodology. However, you may be attending a research meeting where you have the opportunity to present your research to other investigators who have significant expertise in research methodology, though they may not have expertise in your area or in the methods that you use to analyze your data. So you need to present your poster in a way that captures a broad audience. You need to make sure that it tells a simple, clear story of your research, or if you're presenting a case report. You need to plan your poster around no more than 2 to 3 points or objectives and aims. If you had a large project that had multiple aims and multiple hypotheses, you may want to break that up into several posters. Remember, you don't have that much space on the poster, and you don't want to make it look too busy or cluttered. Also, I think it's important to spell out any acronyms if used, and try and use acronyms sparingly when possible. Also, you want to use bullets and simple phrases rather than long, extensive paragraphs or sentences. So what should go in the introduction section? Well, as I mentioned, you should limit it to 2 to 3 bulleted sentences, and in general, you should omit the abstract unless it's specifically requested by the sponsor of the poster session. Typically what you can do is you can provide a handout which has a copy of the abstract. Likewise, you should omit references when possible and avoid using any subscript or superscript references numbers. If you do need to present a reference, present it at the end of your statement and make it more narrative. For example, present the name of the author and maybe the journal. But try and avoid that because, one, usually when you do that, you make the font size much smaller on the references, and it's very hard to read when somebody's walking by your poster. You need to keep the methods section succinct. Use phrases, not sentences. And brevity is the key. Keep the description of the methods and the analysis very brief. avoid clutter, and overly technical terms, jargon, or acronyms. Also, you might consider using a flow diagram that shows the flow of patients or subjects through your study. And this next slide demonstrates a flow diagram we had in a poster we presented several years ago at the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists. And as you can see here, we go through the steps of how we enrolled the patients, randomized them into the two groups, described our intervention, and then our data collection and information we collected when the patients were discharged home. The results section should present results which match the issues and questions of your audience. You need to present statistical results in a simple format that is easily understood by even a layperson. Ideally, you should use tables and figures rather than words. And when presenting associations or relationships through, say, chi-square or correlations, you should describe the direction and magnitude of the associations as well as the relationships. And whenever possible, you should present the confidence intervals, p-values, and any symbols or formatting to denote statistical significance. In this slide is an example from an article by Miller that was talking about how to develop a poster. And this is an example of how you can present complex statistical results graphically. What this figure demonstrates is information on the relative odds of disenrollment in this particular study, and then they have some bullet points off to the side which highlight the results that they found. And in the bottom of their figure they have some notations that provide additional information. This is a nice way to present complex results such as a multivariate analysis in a relatively simple format that most people can understand. In this figure, this is a text summary of additional statistical results which might be found from the same research study. What you can see here is that the author is using bullets to highlight important areas and then simple bullet phrases with the p-values or the significant results. Notice that the sentences aren't long and drawn out, and that the investigator gets straight to the results fairly quickly. In this figure, I don't know about you, but this is a really busy and difficult to follow slide. One of the problems when you're doing advanced statistical analysis and you're trying to figure out what to present in a poster, sometimes that can be really challenging. And you want to present the most important and significant results if you do have a multivariate analysis or multiple data. I would discourage our listeners from using this type of a table in a poster. Rather, if you take that same information out of that large table and only include the most important factors from the analysis, then it's much easier to read. And then at the bottom you can list the other variables which were not included in the model or that which were not significant, so that this makes it easy for the viewer who may have little understanding of complex statistical analysis. It makes it easier for them to understand what your results are. Likewise, it makes it easier when you're standing by the poster trying to present those results to that individual or those group of people. Here's a figure from a poster that we presented at our national meeting several years ago. And this is a bar graph with the mean and standard deviation of milligrams of morphine, and it presents the mean morphine equivalence between 2 days in patients who received gabapentin in blue and in red in control. And what you can see is we have small stars above each day, and down below in the notes section we have a description of what those mean. Also note that the colors really stand out. When you're making a poster, whenever possible you want to try and use colors that really capture the viewer's eye and draw them into your poster. Here's a table from the same poster, and you can see how we try and keep the table simple and easy to read, and we provide any notes down below. The conclusion or discussion section of the poster should interpret but not repeat results. You need to limit the conclusion or discussion section to 2 or 3 bulleted sentences supported by the findings. You want to tell the viewer what your results mean and why they're important. Also, you want to remember to acknowledge your funding agency and any other people who assisted you in the project. On this slide is a good example from an article published in the journal Chest in 2008 by Dr. Hamilton. And what you can do at this point in this podcast is pause it and to take a few minutes to look over this figure. Point out a few important points, take-home messages when developing a poster. You can notice that in terms of looking at the title, you should use a concise, alluring title, preferably all in caps, in sans serif. You want to make sure that the font is readable from 5 millimeters or 10 feet. Below that, you should present the author's names and your institution in a slightly smaller font. You can see here, in this example, that no abstract is included. And then in the introduction or the objectives of this, you want to make sure that people can read it from at least 2 meters apart or 5 feet away. You want to justify the text to the left, and you want to limit your introduction to 2 or 3 bulleted sentences and omit the references. In your methods section, as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure it's a succinct description of what you did and use phrases and not sentences. And in the middle of the poster, typically the middle or the middle third, you want to present your result. Use that area to present eye-catching visuals, graphs, and tables. You also want to choose meaningful titles for visuals to obviate the need for bulleted text. Use color for impact, and make sure that you can actually read what is written on there. In your conclusion section, you want to, as I mentioned, you want to interpret but not repeat your findings. And you want to limit it to 2 or 3 bulleted sentences supported by your findings. And you can see in the middle of this poster example a good acronym to remember when thinking about developing a poster. You need to plan ahead, organize your resources, select your content. You want to tempt the eye, edit ruthlessly, review it again, and savor your success after you get the first place at that meeting. This was a poster that was actually made by our medical graphics artist, Judy Christensen, here at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. She does an excellent job in developing the posters. There's some things I wanted to point on this figure for you. Notice how we limited our introduction to just a few bulleted phrases. And then in this particular study, we were describing an ultrasound technique, and we were comparing this technique. And so what we did is we presented a figure demonstrating how we actually perform the procedure with a notation below. In the methods section, we used bulleted phrases when possible. And then we presented some results in the middle section here, again with bulleted phrases. And then we used several tables to highlight our demographics and baseline data, as well as our primary and secondary outcomes of the study. We also included some images from our ultrasound machine and provided a note describing what we found. And we also included a figure of a Bland-Altman analysis from our results. And then we had a discussion section. You could easily change this header to conclusion. And then we had several bulleted phrases. And then, because we had space, we did include some references at the end of the study. And then we provided the standard disclaimer anytime you present a poster and you're associated with a DoD facility. So organizing your results. As you're getting ready to develop your poster, you need to check the submission guidelines for the size and the layout. You also need to identify the local resources. Who are your co-authors on the study? Do you have any medical writers who can help you with editing? And do you have a graphics artist who can actually help develop the poster, and you just provide them with this information that goes into different sections? You also need to determine how you're going to pay for it. Is this something that you're going to have to pay for out of your budget? Do you have a grant? Have you built that into your grant? Will your department pay for it? These are all questions that you need to ask. It may help you decide what resources you may need or that you can use. Finally, you need to make a timeline. So you need to prepare a time schedule and give a week for each of the following: for drafting the content, for reviewing the draft, for revising the content, for designing the poster, reviewing and revising the content in the layout, and obtaining any final approval, and printing. You also have to factor in Murphy's Law. Now, if you were to add this up, this would take you about 2 months to do. In reality, that's probably pretty realistic. You always want to give yourself more time rather than less when developing a poster, because if you rush through it, then increases the likelihood that there's going to be mistakes on the poster. Here's some presentation issues you also need to think about. You need to remember the 10-10 rule. According to the 10-10 rule, attendees spend only 10 seconds scanning posters as they stroll by from a distance of 10 feet. Use fascinating visual elements to entice attendees to your poster. Unlike journals with rigid standards, posters can accommodate almost any type of visual. Use graphs, photos, drawings, illustrations, radiographs, paintings, and even cartoons to add interest. You should choose some meaningful titles to eliminate the need for excessive text. You should try and limit the number of typefaces. And you want to divide the material into vertical sections, as you saw in the previous poster example. You want to make sure that the font in the narrative part of the poster is at least 14 to 16 font, and your title on the poster is at least 40 font. You want to make sure that there's plenty of white space, or at least space throughout, so the slide does not look busy. One of the biggest pet peeves I have is when I go to a meeting and I look at the posters, and one, they're really hard to read, and it looks like they just cut and pasted text from their manuscript. Also, you want to consider preparing handouts. As I mentioned earlier, you want to edit ruthlessly. You want to try and limit bullet phrases to less than 50 words. Use phrases and not sentences whenever possible. And use the active voice in plain language. Avoid any jargon and acronyms. And make sure your main message is obvious. Also, it's real important to have a colleague or several colleagues critically review your poster and your proofs and give you feedback. Resources available at your facility. Go seek out a medical graphics artist. You should review the final proof forward and backwards. Part of making a poster is thinking about what you're going to say. For the last 3 years, I've been teaching nurse anesthesia students how to do research in anesthesia. And one of their requirements for graduation is that they have to present their research at a national meeting. And we take weeks to prepare them and get down what their canned spiel, what they're going to say to the audience when they come by. So you need to be able to do a 3 to 4 sentence overview of your objectives and your main findings. Remember, many people that are viewing a poster session are everyday clinicians, so you really need to focus on what your results mean in terms of clinical practice. Also, you need to keep it simple so that they understand what you found. If you get overly complex with your statistical analysis and your results, you're going to lose them and they're just going to walk off. Write some notes on how you will explain your results. Again, keep it simple and practice this several times. Get to the point that where you can just speak off the cuff, and treat talking or presenting your poster like you're having a conversation with another individual. Also, think about writing down a few questions you think viewers or the audience might have about your poster. Also, when talking to people, get some feedback from them about your findings. Ask them, what do they think? This might help you develop additional questions for later analysis. Also, it's a great way to identify with others in the field and to network with them. Finally, when developing some handouts, you should really prepare those for people that are more interested in more specific details of your study. Maybe you should consider including an executive summary or even a copy of the abstract of your major findings with maybe additional tables and figures. And finally, provide them with some contact information. Here are some references I used to develop this podcast. Both of these references are excellent resources, and they can be found on PubMed. Also, the last reference, How to Make a Poster Using PowerPoint, was a link I found online searching, and it's an excellent resource that actually tells you how to go through the nuts and bolts of making a poster in PowerPoint. Thank you.